Let's see. Are you familiar with the children's game Red Light, Green Light? Yeah, a lot different versions of this exist all over the world in most cultures around the world. A very popular movie not long ago called Squid Game started with a very dangerous version of Red Light, Green Light. Some of you may have seen that. But in its most basic form, basically, you have all the players who are standing at the starting line, and then you have one person who will yell out, "Green light!" And then everybody that's playing the game can begin moving forward carefully, cautiously toward the finish line. But then the person calling out might say, "Red light!" And then everybody has to freeze. And if you move at all, then you're either out of the game or you have to go back to the starting line. And the goal is to be the person who's completely still every time red light is called, and to be the first person to cross the finish line under a green light. The game is kind of a helpful metaphor for understanding people, because there are red light people and there are green light people. So some people are red light people. There are some people who enjoy stopping. We might call them homebodies. We might call them people who put down roots. You might be a red light person if you've lived in the same home for 20 years, or if you've worked in the exact same job for 15 years. You might be a red light person if your ideal weekend is staying home in your pajamas, watching movies, or playing games. You might be a red light person if you really excel at sticking with someone or something that is difficult or frustrating. You don't get up and go, you stick with it. Some people are red light people. But some people are green light people. Some people just love to go rather than stop. We might call them busybodies, not homebodies. We might say that they, rather than sending down roots, they have wheels. And so you're a green light person. If every 2 to 3 years you're just itching to move to another house or a different apartment or condo, you're a green light person. If every 4 to 5 years you start thinking about a different office location or a different vocation altogether, you're a green light person. If your ideal weekend is to go to a city you've never been to before and to do something you've never done before, you're a green light person if the thought of doing new things and meeting new people is life-giving. So how many of you would say you're a red light person? And how many would say you're a green light person? See, we've got more red lights than green lights, which is very interesting. So one of the things that's interesting about our text this morning is that it's filled with this kind of language. Again and again, we find language of stopping and going and stopping and going. And so we notice the angel in verse 13 issuing a red light. Get up, that is stop whatever you've been doing. And in verse 14, Joseph gets up, that is he stops what he's been doing. And then green light, the angel says, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, that is go. And Joseph takes the child and mother by night and they go to Egypt. They go. And then red light, the angel says, and remain there until I tell you, and that is stop and stay there. And so Joseph remained there until the death of Herod, that is he stopped there. And then we see the same thing happen again starting in verse 20. The angel says, get up, that is stop whatever it is you're doing. And so in verse 21, Joseph got up. He stopped what he was doing. Green light, the angel says, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel. Joseph went to the land of Israel. And then red light, verse 23, there he made his home in a town called Nazareth. He stopped and stayed in Nazareth. So 2 times the angel, through a dream, describes to Joseph a sequence of commands that involve stopping something that Joseph is doing, going to some place he's not currently, and staying in that new place. And 2 times Joseph does that very thing. He stops what he's been doing he gets up and he goes somewhere else, and then he stays in that new place. The first time this happens, Joseph is in Bethlehem. He's told to bring those things to a conclusion. Whatever has been happening there is now ended. And then he is to get up and go with his family to Egypt and to stay there in Egypt. And then the second time, he's in Egypt. And God, through a dream, tells him it's time to bring those things to a conclusion. The time in Egypt is done. So get up and go to Israel, where eventually they landed in Nazareth. Now, all this stopping and going in the text for this morning is necessitated by threats that are being made on the life of Jesus by Herod. And the global church commemorates this text and these tragic events as one of the 12 days of Christmas, which in our calendar happened on December 28th, on Wednesday, the Feast of the Holy Innocents, as the church commemorates the death of countless young children as Herod is trying to kill a young Jesus. And so the grim nature of these events reminds us that sometimes it's not the really good things in life, the really good people in life that necessitate stopping or going. Sometimes it's the really hard stuff in life that we never expected. Sometimes it's the really challenging people in life that necessitate going and stopping. But all of this going and stopping is not just sort of incidental or coincidental to this text. It's integral to it. And so Matthew explains it to us by quoting something from the Old Testament where he said God was calling his son out of Egypt. And with that quote, what Matthew's doing is he's pointing us back to the Exodus. And he's saying that this nativity scene is a redoing of the Exodus. It's a second Exodus. And of course, the first Exodus was the ultimate stop and go and stop story, as God finally appeared to his people through Moses to tell them, get up. This time in Egypt is finally over. This terrible circumstance of serving as the slaves of the leadership of the nation of Egypt has ended. So get up and go. Go across the Red Sea. Go across this wilderness and stop in the new land, in the promised land, in your new home. And Matthew is saying that story is this story. And in tying the nativity scene to the Exodus story, what Matthew's telling us is that this kind of movement, this stopping and going and stopping and going, is inherent in human life. It's normal in human life. It's a fundamental part of life with God. A few years ago, there was a documentary made called Should I Stay or Should I Go? The filmmakers interviewed people in Germany and Austria and Sweden and France and Slovenia. And they interviewed people about times when they had to literally face this decision. Would they stay in the country where they were living, or would they get up and go and move to another country? And they had these individuals talk through how they made that decision, what financial circumstances prompted it, what personal, environmental, family, geographical issues might have influenced their decisions. Why did they stay? Why did they go? And then they put all those interviews together in this documentary. And the existence of the documentary itself points to the reality that people all over the world face this fundamental question: should I stay or should I go? Is this a red light or is this a green light? And this reality is an especially poignant one as we begin a new year. Because the reality is that in 2023, there will be some red light moments. There will be some times in this new year when God brings something to a conclusion, when God brings something to an end. And it could be something cherished, something treasured, a relationship, a task, even a vocation. It could also be something unpleasant that God finally brings to an end. And it's important to note that red light moments can be difficult. Most of us don't like endings, especially endings that we weren't anticipating or endings of things that we were enjoying. And so navigating red lights can be difficult, especially if a red light is God indicating, I want you to stay in this. I want you to stick with this difficult person, to stay in this difficult situation, even though what you want to do is get up and go. And because of the difficulties that red light moments often bring to us, we're apt to misinterpret them. I myself many times have wrongly turned God's red lights into my green lights. One example, the first church that I served in full-time was a church in New Mexico, and I was there for 4.5 years. And at the end of 4.5 years, I got up and left. I went. But as I've looked back on my own thought process and my own discernment process for finally getting up and going from that church after 4.5 years, I can see it was terribly flawed. And that what I was interpreting as a green light from God, yeah, let's get up, let's go, was actually a red light. I think God was telling me, really, I'd like you to stay here a little bit longer because there's some more things that you need to do and there's some more work that I need to do with you. Because red lights are difficult, sometimes we turn them into our own green lights. And then the opposite is true. In 2023, during this new year, there will inevitably be green light moments. There will be some times in this new year when God invites you into a new relationship, a new friendship, a new way of serving and ministering to other people, and even new spaces that haven't been part of your life up until now. And green light moments carry their own kinds of difficulty, especially because so many of us are sort of red light people. We like to do what we like to do in the way that we like to do it. And we don't like to be taken out of those ruts and those routines. But there will be times in 2023 when God calls us out of those routines. And He tells us it's time to do something new, to do something old in a new way, to engage in a new relationship, to engage in a new way of ministry and service. And because many of us have difficulties with green lights, sometimes we reinterpret them and turn them into red lights. I've done this. One brief example, the congregation that I served before coming here, I served for 21 years. And several times, as I was thinking about my service there, I believed that God was saying, you should just stay here. It's not time to go. But in reality, as I look back on that, I think God was giving a green light long before we actually left for a variety of reasons. And I just want to say, as this month, Kendra and I celebrate our 2nd anniversary with this wonderful faith family. We're so glad for that green light that brought us to you and that brought you to us. Yes, thank you. Bob Goff writes a little bit about the difficulties that we have with red lights and green lights. And so he says, if you're a musician and you sing bad songs, I wouldn't be too quick to say, God shut the door on my career. It's a hard truth, but maybe it's time to get better at singing. If you're an author like me and write uninspiring words, as has happened often to me, let's aim to bring it to Jesus and not blame him for it. What I'm saying is that it's easy to conjure up divine intervention for poor performance. Let's not fall for it. And instead, we can get busy getting better. Sometimes we'll encounter something and we'll say, well, I guess God is just bringing that to an end in my life. I guess that season is over. And maybe that's not God's red light. Maybe that's just God saying, I'd like you to try a little bit harder here because I'd like you to stick with this. Another author, David Rico, summarizes an article in this table where he's talking about our tendency to misinterpret red lights and green lights. And so he says, when we stop, when we stay and we don't go from something that's just not working, what we're doing is we're tolerating the intolerable and we're doubting ourselves. We're losing faith in our own inner resources. And then on the opposite hand, when we go and we don't stop or stay long enough in what actually can work, we're not tolerating what can change for the better. And we're doubting the power of love. We're losing faith in how people can grow and how their relationship can be renewed and thrive. And so what all of this then points us to is that learning to discern red lights and green lights is a critical skill to learn, especially as we begin a new year. Now, Joseph is greatly assisted because Joseph is given dreams and an angel and the voice of God telling him, get up, go, stop, stay. I believe that God may still do that and might even still do that in 2023. And I also believe that God might use other ways of providing a red light or a green light for you as an individual, for us as a church. And so one of the most critical skills that we need to learn is this skill of discernment and recognizing that we often don't get it right. And so we should be inviting wise people into our lives. When we begin making red light, green light decisions, we should seek out other resources as we begin making red light, green light decisions. Let me recommend a couple of resources that have been helpful for me. 2 books, one by Mark Thibodeau called God's Voice Within, The Ignatian Way to Discerning God's Will. This book is sort of a workbook for the kinds of things to look for as you're deciding something like going or staying, stopping or going. And then the other book is by Dallas Willard called Hearing God. And it's one of the most helpful and comprehensive books that I know of where Willard tries to teach us how to better hear whether God's saying stop or whether God is saying go. Perhaps at the beginning of this new year, perhaps you already have some intuitive sense of some of that. So let me just leave you with a couple of questions for reflection. So consider how you might answer this regarding this job, relationship, regarding my health, whatever. 2023 is a red light year, the time to get up, the time to end or stop something. Or alternatively, regarding this relationship, job, whatever, regarding my health. 2023 is a green light year, a time to endure, a time to keep going, a time to stick with something or someone. That is, as you consider this new year, what red lights and green lights do you already anticipate God bringing your way?